The crowd gasped as thunder roared outside, shaking the very ground beneath the enormous church. Pastor Okongo stood in the center of the grand hall, his white robe gleaming unnaturally under the chandelier lights. His voice, powerful and commanding, rose above the storm as he called out for a miracle. A woman in a wheelchair rolled forward, her face streaked with tears, pleading for healing. Pastor Okongo stretched out his hand and shouted, "Rise." The woman stood, then walked, then ran. The congregation erupted in shouts of praise, clapping and crying out in disbelief. But in that electrifying moment, something dark flickered. A shadow, no, a figure, loomed behind Pastor Okongo. It wasn't a person. It wasn't human. It had glowing red eyes, long, twisted limbs, and horns curling from its head. It vanished in an instant, but not before young Chijioke, seated in the front row, locked eyes with it. Nobody else seemed to notice, not even Pastor Okongo, who continued his sermon as if nothing had happened. But Chijioke's heart pounded so loudly he thought it would burst. He clenched his little sister Amora's hand tightly, whispering, "Did you see that?" Amora shook her head, confused. The figure's presence had felt like a warning, and Chijioke knew deep down that something was terribly wrong. He decided he had to find out the truth, no matter what it cost. Years earlier, Pastor Okongo had been a humble man in a small village. Before he became famous, he was just known as Oki, the son of a fisherman. Oki's life had been ordinary until the day he wandered into the forbidden forest of Nkena. The villagers spoke of the forest in hushed tones, warning that anyone who entered would never return the same. But Oki had laughed at their fears, desperate to prove his bravery. It was deep in that forest that he met a man, or what seemed to be a man. The stranger sat by a river that sparkled unnaturally under the moonlight. His smile was too wide, his teeth too sharp. "You want power, don't you?" the man had said, as if he already knew Oki's deepest desires. Oki hesitated, but the man's voice was hypnotic. "Say yes, and I will make you the most powerful man in the land. Kings will bow to you, and people will call you God." Oki's mind raced. He thought of his poor family, his sick mother, the endless poverty that had chained them all their lives. With trembling lips, he said, "Yes." The man's laugh echoed through the forest, a sound that would haunt Oki's dreams for years. He handed Oki a small, black stone. "Carry this always, and the world will be yours. But remember, everything has a price." Before Oki could ask what the price was, the man disappeared. Now, years later, Oki, now Pastor Okongo, was unrecognizable. The small, timid boy was gone, replaced by a man revered across the continent. His name was spoken in awe. People traveled for days just to hear him preach. But Chijioke had seen something no one else had, and he couldn't shake the feeling that Pastor Okongo's miracles came from a place far darker than heaven. Late that night, while the rest of the family slept, Chijioke sneaked out of the house. The rain had stopped, but the air was heavy, and the moon hid behind thick clouds. He needed answers. With a flashlight in one hand and his grandfather's old Bible in the other, he made his way to the church. The doors creaked as he pushed them open, and he stepped inside, his small frame dwarfed by the towering pillars and high ceilings. The silence was deafening. Chijioke's footsteps echoed as he walked toward the altar. He had no plan, only a burning curiosity and a strange sense of courage. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the hall, and the chandelier above began to sway. He froze, clutching the Bible tighter. "What are you doing here?" a voice boomed. It wasn't Pastor Okongo. It was deeper, colder, and it came from everywhere and nowhere all at once. Chijioke spun around, but the hall was empty. The voice laughed, low and menacing. Then, from the shadows, the figure he had seen earlier emerged, its red eyes glowing brighter than ever. Chijioke stumbled back, his heart racing. The figure stepped closer, its long, twisted limbs scraping against the marble floor. "You shouldn't be here, little boy," it hissed. "Leave now, before it's too late." But Chijioke didn't move. His fear was swallowed by a strange determination. "What are you?" he demanded, his voice shaking but firm. The figure tilted its head, amused. "I am the beginning of your pastor's power and the end of his soul. If you wish to know more, come closer. But beware, the truth will cost you everything." Chijioke hesitated, his instinct screaming at him to run. But his feet stayed planted. He took a step forward, and then another. The figure laughed again, a sound that echoed through the empty church. And then the ground beneath Chijioke's feet began to crack. Chijioke barely had time to react as the cracks in the floor spread like lightning bolts, the marble shattering beneath him. He jumped back just as a deep, fiery chasm opened where he had been standing. Heat surged upward, and from the abyss came an unearthly wailing, the cries of countless voices, trapped and suffering. The figure's laughter grew louder, more sinister, as it pointed a clawed finger at Chijioke. "This is your pastor's foundation," it sneered. "Built on lies, sealed with blood, and fed by the souls of the desperate." Chijioke's hands trembled as he held up the Bible, its worn leather cover a small shield against the overwhelming darkness. "You're lying," he shouted, his voice cracking. The figure snarled, its glowing eyes narrowing. "Am I? Then why don't you ask him yourself?" With a wave of its hand, the air in the church shimmered, and a ghostly image appeared above the chasm. It was Pastor Okongo, kneeling before the same sharp-toothed man from the forest. Pastor Okongo's face was younger but filled with fear as he held out the black stone, his lips moving in a silent plea. Chijioke stared in disbelief. "No. It can't be true." The figure leaned closer, its breath icy against Chijioke's skin. "He traded his soul for power, boy. And now, his debt is almost due." The ground trembled again, the fiery chasm widening as if hungry for more. Chijioke staggered back, gripping the Bible tightly as if it were his lifeline. The figure's shadowy form seemed to grow, towering over him with an aura of pure menace. "Time is running out," it hissed, its voice slicing through the thick air. "Leave now, or face the consequences of meddling in what you cannot understand." But Chijioke's resolve hardened. He looked up at the figure, his small frame defiant. "I'm not leaving. If there's something evil here, I'll stop it. You'll see." The figure let out a bone-chilling laugh that echoed through the empty hall. "Then prepare yourself, little boy. The truth will break you." The chasm began to close as the figure dissolved into smoke, its sinister laughter fading into the distance. Chijioke was left alone, the church eerily silent once more. But in the depths of his mind, he knew this was just the beginning. The chasm began to close, but the cries from within did not stop. Chijioke's legs trembled, but he held his ground, his knuckles white as he clutched the Bible. "If his debt is due, then what happens to us? To everyone who believes in him?" he asked, his voice a whisper. The figure's red eyes gleamed with cruel delight. "What happens? His fall will drag them all with him. Faith built on lies crumbles easily. And when the people see the truth, despair will consume them." Chijioke's mind raced, his thoughts a storm of fear and questions. "But if I know the truth, I can stop him. I can warn them," he said, his voice rising with desperation. The figure laughed again, a slow, mocking sound. "Oh, little boy, you think you can stop what has already begun. You have no idea what you're up against. But go ahead, try. If you dare." Before Chijioke could respond, the figure melted into the shadows, leaving him alone in the vast, silent church. The air felt heavier, and the faint scent of sulfur lingered. The chasm was gone, the floor smooth and unbroken as if nothing had happened. Yet the vision of Pastor Okongo kneeling before the sharp-toothed man burned in Chijioke's mind. He turned and ran, the Bible clutched tightly to his chest, his heart pounding like a drum. As he bolted out of the church into the cool night air, a single thought echoed in his mind: what will I do now? The next day, Chijioke struggled to act normal. At breakfast, his parents and siblings laughed and chatted as if the world were perfectly fine. But every sound felt distant to him. Every bite of food turned to ash in his mouth. He couldn't stop thinking about what he had seen, and what it meant for everyone who believed in Pastor Okongo. When his father mentioned attending the evening prayer session at the church, Chijioke's stomach clenched. He needed a plan, but he had no idea where to start. All he knew was that he couldn't face the darkness alone. That night, as the family prepared to leave for church, Chijioke grabbed Amora's arm. "I need to talk to you," he whispered urgently. She frowned, confused, but followed him outside. "What is it?" she asked, her voice low. Chijioke hesitated, unsure how to begin. "Something's wrong with Pastor Okongo," he finally blurted out. "I saw something terrible." Amora stared at him, her brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" "Everyone loves Pastor Okongo. He's done so many miracles." Chijioke shook his head. "It's not real, Amora. I saw where his power comes from. It's evil. We can't trust him." Amora's face twisted with disbelief. "You're crazy. You just don't understand how powerful God is." "I'm telling you the truth," Chijioke said, his voice trembling with frustration. "Please, just trust me. I need your help." Before Amora could respond, their father called from the house. "Amora! Chijioke! Hurry up, or we'll be late." Amora gave Chijioke a hard look, then turned and ran back to the house. Chijioke watched her go, his chest tight with disappointment. He would have to face the truth alone, at least for now. As the family headed to the church, Chijioke hung back, his heart heavy. He didn't know how, but he was determined to uncover Pastor Okongo's secrets. And this time, he would be ready for whatever darkness awaited him. The storm is far from over. The figure's laughter echoed louder as the fiery chasm seemed to grow wider, its blazing depths lighting up the dark church. Chijioke's knees buckled, but he clutched the Bible tighter, its pages fluttering in the unnatural wind. Above the flames, the ghostly image of Pastor Okongo trembled, his lips forming words that Chijioke could not hear. "His death is almost due," the figure repeated, its voice dripping with malice. "And when the collector comes, everyone who believes in him will fall." "No!" Chijioke shouted, stepping back from the edge of the chasm. "He's a man of God. He helps people. The figure cut him off with a wave of its clawed hand. "Helps? Do you think he heals out of kindness? Every miracle cost a piece of him. And when there's nothing left, he'll belong to us, as will all those who followed his lies." Chijioke's mind raced. Could it be true? Was the man his parents idolized nothing more than a pawn in a wicked game? His heart screamed to deny it, but the haunting image of Pastor Okongo kneeling before that sharp-toothed man told a different story. "What can I do?" Chijioke whispered, his voice barely audible. The figure's grin widened. "Do? There's nothing you can do. But if you insist on playing hero, boy, you'll end up like him, or worse." Suddenly, the chasm began to close, the fiery glow fading as the floor sealed itself seamlessly. The figure dissolved into smoke, its laughter lingering in the air. The church was silent once more, but the oppressive weight of what Chijioke had seen remained. Breathing heavily, Chijioke turned and bolted for the door. The night air hit his face like a slap, cool and crisp, but it did nothing to calm the storm inside him. He ran all the way home, his chest heaving, his thoughts a jumbled mess. The next morning, Chijioke sat at the breakfast table, his appetite gone. His father was talking about how Pastor Okongo's upcoming crusade would bring even more blessings to the family. His mother nodded in agreement, and even Amora seemed excited. "Chijioke, you'll come with us to the prayer session tonight, won't you?" his father asked, noticing his son's silence. Chijioke looked up, his throat dry. "I'm not feeling well," he said, pushing his plate away. His father frowned. "You've been acting strange lately. Is something bothering you?" Chijioke hesitated, glancing at Amora. Her curious eyes bored into him, and he knew she was still upset from their conversation the night before. "No, nothing's wrong," he mumbled. After breakfast, Chijioke slipped out of the house and headed for the market square. He needed answers, and there was only one person who might be able to help him, Mama Nkechi, the old herbalist who lived on the edge of the village. People whispered that she knew things others didn't, that she could see beyond the physical world. When Chijioke reached her small, thatched hut, he hesitated. The door creaked open before he could knock, and Mama Nkechi's raspy voice called out, "Come in, boy. I've been expecting you." Startled, Chijioke stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of herbs and incense. Mama Nkechi sat cross-legged on a mat, her wrinkled face calm but watchful. "You've seen something, haven't you?" she asked, her sharp eyes boring into him. Chijioke nodded, his hands trembling. "Something terrible. I don't know what to do." Mama Nkechi gestured for him to sit. "Tell me everything." As Chijioke recounted the events of the previous night, Mama Nkechi listened intently, her expression growing graver with each word. When he finished, she sighed heavily. "The shadow you saw is not of this world. It is a spirit bound to the man you call Pastor Okongo. And if what you say is true, his time is running out. Can I stop it?" Chijioke asked, his voice desperate. Mama Nkechi shook her head. "Stopping it is not your burden to bear. But you can reveal the truth. If the people know, their faith in him will break the connection. Without their belief, he will lose his power." "But how do I do that?" Chijioke asked. Mama Nkechi reached into a small wooden box and pulled out a bundle of dried leaves. "This will help you see what is hidden. Burn it in the church, and the truth will reveal itself. But be warned, once the truth is out, there will be consequences." Chijioke swallowed hard, taking the bundle from her with trembling hands. "Thank you, Mama Nkechi." She gave him a small, sad smile. "Be brave, child. The path you've chosen is not an easy one." That night, as his family prepared to leave for the prayer session, Chijioke slipped the bundle of leaves into his pocket. He knew what he had to do, but fear clawed at him with every step. The church loomed ahead, its grand structure glowing in the moonlight. Inside, the crowd was already gathering, their voices rising in anticipation. Chijioke took a deep breath and stepped inside, the weight of the truth pressing heavily on his shoulders. What would happen when the truth came to light? Would anyone believe him, or would it already be too late? The church was alive with fervor, the congregation swaying and shouting as Pastor Okongo stood on the altar, his hands raised high. His voice boomed through the massive hall, declaring blessings and miracles for all who believed. The air was thick with incense and the scent of burning candles, but Chijioke's focus was on the bundle of dried leaves in his pocket. The memory of Mama Nkechi's warning echoed in his mind: once the truth is out, there will be consequences. Chijioke slid into the shadows at the back of the church, his heart pounding. The leaves felt heavy in his hand as he pulled them out. He looked toward the altar, where Pastor Okongo was calling forward a blind man, promising to restore his sight. The congregation erupted in cheers, their faith unshaken. With trembling fingers, Chijioke lit the bundle of leaves using a candle on the wall. The flames quickly consumed the herbs, releasing a pungent, earthy smoke that swirled around him. He held his breath, unsure what to expect. The smoke rose higher, twisting and curling as if alive, and then it began to spread across the room. At first, no one noticed. But then the murmurs began. "What's that smell? Is something burning?" The congregation started to turn, their attention shifting from Pastor Okongo to the strange smoke now filling the church. Pastor Okongo's voice faltered as he noticed the disturbance. His eyes scanned the crowd, then locked onto Chijioke, who stood frozen at the back of the hall. For a split second, fear flickered across the pastor's face, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Young man," Pastor Okongo said, his voice strained but firm, "this is the house of God. What are you doing?" Chijioke didn't answer. The smoke was changing, growing thicker and darker, spreading like ink in water. And then, to everyone's horror, it began to take shape. Gasps and cries filled the room as the shadowy figure from Chijioke's vision emerged from the smoke. Its red eyes burned like embers, and its twisted limbs stretched unnaturally as it towered over the altar. The air grew heavy, and the temperature in the room plummeted. "Behold," the figure's voice boomed, shaking the very walls. "This is the man you call your savior, your miracle worker. Look upon his truth." The congregation screamed as ghostly images appeared in the smoke, visions of Pastor Okongo kneeling before the sharp-toothed man in the forest, offering his soul for power. The scenes shifted, showing him performing rituals in secret, drawing power from the black stone while others suffered in his place. "No. This is a lie," Pastor Okongo shouted, his voice desperate. "This is the devil's work. Do not believe it." But the images didn't stop. They showed the fiery chasm beneath the church, the countless souls wailing in agony, feeding the power that Pastor Okongo wielded. The congregation erupted into chaos, some people crying, others running for the doors. "Stop this!" Pastor Okongo roared, stepping toward the shadowy figure. "I command you in the name of the Lord." "You command nothing," the figure hissed, its voice dripping with disdain. "Your time is up." Before anyone could react, the black stone in Pastor Okongo's pocket began to glow. He staggered back, clutching his chest as if an invisible hand were crushing him. The congregation fell silent, watching in stunned horror as Pastor Okongo dropped to his knees, his once powerful voice reduced to a desperate plea. "Please," he whispered, his eyes wide with terror. "I'll do anything." The figure laughed, its voice echoing through the church. "You've already done enough." The black stone burst into flames, and Pastor Okongo let out a blood-curdling scream. The fire consumed him, but instead of burning his body, it seemed to devour his very essence. His screams grew fainter until they disappeared altogether, leaving only silence and the faint smell of smoke. The shadowy figure turned its glowing eyes toward the congregation, now cowering in fear. "Let this be a lesson," it said, its voice cold and final. "Faith built on lies leads only to destruction." With that, the figure dissolved into smoke, leaving the church eerily quiet. Chijioke stood frozen, his legs trembling. The congregation slowly began to stir, their faces pale and filled with disbelief. Some wept openly, while others simply stared at the spot where Pastor Okongo had vanished. Chijioke clutched the now extinguished bundle of leaves, his mind racing. The truth had been revealed, but at what cost? And what would happen to the people who had placed their faith in a man who was never what he seemed? As the first rays of dawn crept through the stained glass windows, Chijioke knew that this was far from over. The darkness had been exposed, but its shadow still lingered. Somewhere in the depths of the forest, the sharp-toothed man was waiting. The church was a shell of its former self, its walls still standing but the spirit within shattered. News of what had transpired spread like wildfire across the village and beyond. Many refused to believe the stories, dismissing them as the wild imagination of frightened minds. But others whispered in fear, acknowledging the weight of what they had witnessed. Chijioke, however, found no relief. The truth had brought him no peace, only questions. Why had the shadowy figure chosen to expose Pastor Okongo now? And what role did the sharp-toothed man play in all of this? He couldn't shake the feeling that something even darker was on the horizon. That night, Chijioke sat alone in his room, the events replaying endlessly in his mind. His sister Amara knocked softly on the door before slipping inside. "Chijioke," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The people are scared. They are saying you brought a curse to the village." "I didn't bring a curse," Chijioke replied, his voice heavy. "I brought the truth." "But what do we do now?" Amara asked, her eyes wide with fear. Before Chijioke could answer, a knock sounded at the front door. Their father opened it to find Mama Nkechi standing on the porch, her face grim. "It's not over," she said, her voice low. "The sharp-toothed man has been awakened. And he will not rest until he takes what he is owed." The next morning, Chijioke and Mama Nkechi stood at the edge of the forbidden forest. The air was thick with tension, the trees looming like silent sentinels. Amara had begged to come, but Mama Nkechi had insisted she stay behind. "The forest is not a place for the faint of heart," she said, gripping her walking stick tightly. "It feeds on fear." Chijioke swallowed hard and nodded. Together, they stepped into the shadows of the forest. The air grew colder with every step, and the light from the outside world seemed to fade away. Strange sounds echoed around them, whispers, rustling leaves, distant laughter. "Stay close," Mama Nkechi warned. "He knows we're here." After what felt like hours, they reached the clearing by the river. The water sparkled unnaturally under the dim light of the moon, just as it had when Pastor Okongu first made his fateful deal. And there, sitting on a rock with that same eerie grin, was the sharp-toothed man. "Oh, visitors," he said, his voice smooth and mocking. "I was wondering when someone would come to see me." Chijioke stepped forward, his fist clenched. "You tricked him. You gave him power, but you destroyed him." The man's grin widened. "Destroyed him? No, boy. I merely gave him what he wanted. It was his greed that destroyed him." Mama Nkechi raised her walking stick, pointing it at the man. "You have caused enough pain. It's time for this to end." The sharp-toothed man laughed, a sound that made Chijioke's skin crawl. "End? You think you can end me? I am as old as the earth, as eternal as the stars. You cannot destroy me. But we can stop you," Mama Nkechi said, her voice firm. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small vial filled with a glowing liquid. "This is the essence of truth. It will reveal your true form and strip you of your power." The sharp-toothed man's grin faltered for the first time. "You dare challenge me," he hissed, his voice growing darker. Without hesitation, Mama Nkechi uncorked the vial and flung its contents toward the man. The liquid erupted into a blinding light, engulfing him completely. He screamed, a sound so terrible that the forest itself seemed to tremble. His form began to shift and distort, revealing a grotesque, twisted creature beneath the facade. "You cannot defeat me," he roared, his voice echoing through the clearing. "I will return, and when I do, your world will bow to me." With a final, deafening roar, the sharp-toothed man dissolved into smoke, his essence scattered by the wind. The forest grew silent, and the oppressive weight that had hung in the air vanished. Chijioke and Mama Nkechi emerged from the forest just as the sun began to rise. The village was waiting, their faces filled with both fear and hope. Mama Nkechi raised her hand, her voice clear and strong. "The darkness has been driven back, but it is not gone. We must remain vigilant, for evil feeds on our greed and fear." The villagers nodded solemnly, their faith now tempered with caution. Chijioke felt a sense of relief, but also a lingering unease. The sharp-toothed man's words echoed in his mind, "I will return." That night, as the village gathered around the fire, Chijioke sat with Amora, his hand resting on the Bible. He had seen the worst of humanity and the darkness that lurked beneath the surface. But he had also seen the power of truth and courage. "This isn't the end," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "But when the darkness comes again, we'll be ready." Amora squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with determination. "We will." And so, the village began to heal, their faith not in men, but in truth and in themselves. But deep in the heart of the forbidden forest, the shadows stirred, waiting for the day they would rise again. Be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the like button. This way, you get to indulge in more enchanting stories, carefully crafted to transport you to worlds of wonder and awe. Thank you for watching.